Oh. Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 24th of August. We have most of our technology problems sorted, but we just have one councillor online, Councillor Dingwall, and unfortunately we've got sound from Councillor Dingwall but no picture, so we can hear you. Well, I hope we can. So earth to Councillor Dingwall.
Good morning.
Yep. We can see her?
Yes,
Oh,
she can't.
okay. We can see her, but she can't see us. So just letting you know that, Councillor. So first up, we have apologies. So I have a few apologies. So we have early departure for the Mayor and Councillor Bowen, and Councillor's late arrival for oh no, she's here, so that's not late arrival. Early departure for Councillor Hancock and Councillor Harpeta. And the Deputy Mayor late arrival. So I think I've covered everybody. So we can take out late arrival for Councillor Dingwall because she's here. So I'm happy to move the apologies. Are there any other apologies just before I move that? And Councillor Naylor is seconder. So we will vote when we're ready. Should be 17. Oh, yeah, and Lisa's. Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Right, and I'll just do the health and safety. So this meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the council's YouTube channel, and just make sure that we've just followed the health and safety requirements in the chamber. So the housekeeping and safety procedures are on the screen, and please follow the administrators if you need any assistance should there be an emergency, which I hope there won't be. And you know about our COVID restrictions framework. And we've only got one councillor online, so we're pretty much all here today, which is good. So that's all from me for health and safety. So are there I'm not aware of any additional items. And are there any declarations of interest? Not aware of any. And on public comment, I'm not aware of any. Going well here. And we do have a full agenda today, so I'm expecting a full day's meeting. So I'd appreciate if you don't ask any unnecessary questions. Not that you do, but just in case you're thinking about it. And now we'll move on to the minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of June 22nd. So I'm happy to move the minutes. Councillor Harpeta, second. Any comments on the minutes? We will now move to vote. And that is carried unanimously. Now we're just going to alter the order of the agenda, and we're just moving item number 8. We're going to do that one first because we have members of the airport board here, and that saves them waiting unnecessarily. So we will start with item number 8, which is on page 101, and Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager of Finance. And with you, Steve, we have Murray Georgiou, the Chair of the Palmerston North Airport. So over to you.
Good morning, all. I think the report's reasonably self-explanatory. I've got a brief cover here to the letter we've received from Murray as the Chair of the Airport Board. You recall that last year you approved a level of remuneration for the directors, assuming that there would be an increased number of 6. In the end, now there are 5, and so we're seeking clarity around the level of remuneration. The board has sought to leave the level at the 135,000 that you've approved and apply that to the 5 directors. And my recommendation to you is you do that. It's important that we do remunerate the board appropriately if we expect them to undertake the work that we allocate to them as the directors running that company. So I've got nothing more to add, just respond to questions, and I expect that presumably most of those will go to Murray rather than me.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Murray, do you want to make any comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the Mayor Councillors. If I could, Madam Chair, just it is very summarised and pretty much along the comments Steve's made. So the decision made by the committee last year was to remunerate the board at 135,000 for the year, without specifying the per person rate. With the resignation of one director who the board has recommended not to be replaced, and that's based on the skill requirements that the board has established for the roles. The full amount of 135,000 could be distributed across 5 directors, as was requested by the company last year. However, it's clear too that the board recognises that it wasn't the intention of the shareholder and wants transparency as to the payments made to the directors. The substance of the matter remains, as per last year's report, that the board be remunerated at a rate appropriate to the skills required, appropriate to the time and the resource input, and comparable to similar organisations. Look, I'm mindful of the nature of this request, but I'm also mindful that current and future board members should be remunerated at a fair and equitable level. And I'm more than happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. We'll now open for questions. Are there any questions? Are we not working? Just put your hand up if you wish to, Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. Can I ask, if I ask the director who has resigned, if I ask the sequence of appointment of directors. Was she or he the last one appointed or before the last one?
The director who resigned due to ill health, had been appointed 3 years back, but couldn't complete the term. She wasn't the last to be appointed. The last one to be appointed was towards the start of this year.
Okay, thank you.
We are now working, so if you press your button. So Councillor Hawhita.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the report, Steve and Murray. This is a question for you, Steve. What is the normal process for looking at directors' remuneration, and how do you normally go about increases, Steve, when it comes to this process? I'm talking about the process rather than anything else.
In terms of the process, it's normal that about this time or a little bit later than this, when we consider the annual report for the company and the annual meeting that's coming up, that there would be the issue of the total remuneration for the board that would be considered, and that's required under the constitution of the company to be authorised by ordinary resolution of the shareholders. So council as the sole shareholder gives instruction to the person who's delegated by the council to have this role as a shareholder rep, and they sign on the council's behalf and so at the time that the matter is considered by the council normally, then we have material provided to us from the company, from the board usually, in terms of their view of the world, and it's my practice to consider that and to make a recommendation to you in some way in the report that comes to you as part of that. And so last year we did that at the time that the request was made for an increase, and it was muddied a little bit at the time by the request to consider increasing the numbers of board members, but the council at the time chose to approve a figure of 135 rather than the larger figure that was requested.
So just a question around increasing remuneration to individual councillors.
Individual board members, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, board members, sorry. Board members. Is that is up to the chair, or is it up to the board themselves?
The council's role as a shareholder is to provide the total sum, and it's the board itself that decides how that's allocated within the...
Okay. That was the key question that I was asking. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Murray and Steve. Just quickly, the letter really talks about sort of the increased expectation, I guess, across the Ruapehu Business Park and also the terminal development. Murray, can you perhaps just give us a bit of an understanding of the additional work that will actually impose upon the board? Thanks.
The additional work will be quite broad in its nature and long in its term, I would have expected. We set about as a company to realise an increase in the value of the assets that the company holds on behalf of the shareholder. We did so a few years ago when we looked at the surrounding properties and said that they were dormant assets. We needed to do something with them. If not simply for encouragement of the industrial and commercial areas in and around or bordering the northeastern industrial zone, but also to try to establish an alternate revenue stream for the airport, something that wasn't being achieved, something that would utilise those assets to their best advantage. And of course, we saw some of that recently, well, within the last 2 years, when COVID disruptions to Air New Zealand in particular meant that we saw quite a reduction in our revenue. However, other aspects stayed up, and that's what we want to increase in the future, so that the council via the airport company has a much more solid revenue stream through there. When we get into that, we start to look at what's required. A few years back, we sought the expertise on the board of a particular skill set around property ownership, development, and so on. And we were very fortunate that we did get such a person. Those are the sorts of skills and requirements that go beyond, if I could call it, normal aeronautical requirements or normal company activity, and we needed to then step up different skills. We have now got we believe a requirement to have a terminal and property development separate group within the board, so that we give attention to those assets and how we can best utilise them. One thing we don't want to do is simply sell up all of those assets to realise some profits and not use those into the long term. So we're looking there very much about how can we increase shareholder value, both in terms of the value of the asset, but also the revenue streams. Now, these are different skills to what's required elsewhere. They take a considerable amount of time, or have done so far, and we believe will do so into the future.
Madam Chair, thank you. Thanks, Murray.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming in. Just on page 103 in the table at the bottom of that page, it talks about the average airport fees of 134,000. Now, going back to the December paper, when we increased that pool from 108 to 135,000, there was information provided about that average airport, and that included Queenstown, which was quite a lot higher than the other regional airports, which obviously brought that average up. Do you consider that Queenstown is a comparable airport to Palmerston North in terms of finding an appropriate average to determine director fees?
Queenstown would certainly have more traffic, both aeronautically and passenger numbers by far. I think, if I've got the right information just here in front of me, that Queenstown, yes, it is shown on that table, but the average excluded Queenstown because of the increased or the much larger fee base. So yes, it was $250,000, but it was excluded from the average.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And just second question, have we ever had any issues recruiting appropriate directors to the airport?
Well, that's one that the council recruits, not myself, but I have been involved in part in different arrangements, I think each of about the last 5 years, and it does vary, and the number of applicants has varied considerably. I do recall that 5 years ago or so, there was a huge number of applicants. That wasn't the case last year. In fact, that was part of the reason we came back to the council last year and sought to get another director, because we were missing some skill sets. So that, and in our mind, that was because they weren't coming forward. Okay, thank you. And just one further question. So obviously there was a step up in December last year. When would the next review time be expected to be coming back for an increase, if we weren't to increase it today?
It's something we review each year, I guess.
Every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Stephen Murray. I think that Councillor Naylor sort of teased out the question around what peer boards are getting paid. What's the total asset base you manage for us?
In excess of 80 million.
Okay.
Net.
And what's the extra you're seeking?
Well,
what's the dollar value for the total board?
Well, the board, the shareholders already set the level at 135. If we were to take it back, if I could say, on that per person arrangement, then we're probably talking about $17,000
Right.
across the board.
Okay, and I think the other question I had has been teased out by Councillor Hancock. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steve and Murray. A question first for you, Steve. Have we ever looked at setting up a system whereby we track remuneration for this board along a CPI or some other increment that gives it a level of predictability and perhaps a little bit less political flavor?
We haven't done that specifically, but at times we have looked at material from the Association Directors or whatever, Directors Institute and the like, to try and get some background. We haven't done that just this time, but we have done that at times in the past. But we haven't got a standard system of tracking. I guess board fees do vary quite a lot, and the best comparison, I think, is probably with the others in the similar industry.
Thank you. So looking ahead to the next regular interval of this, Steve, would it be possible to bring that as an option forward for the council's consideration?
We're scheduled, I'm not just sure whether we'll make it or not, we're scheduled to be coming back to you in September with the annual report of the company. I haven't just caught up on whether that's going to be possible yet or not, but it would be in September. We can certainly, I'm not sure at that stage, we'll certainly address the issue of remuneration as part of that and consider what we can do to support any recommendations that come forward at that time.
Thank you. And a question for you, Murray, just in your summing up at the beginning, you spoke of a fair and equitable approach to remuneration for the current board and future boards. And I was just wondering, I guess if you could give us a bit of perspective, kind of what sits inside that for you. And one of the specific questions that's on my mind is to what extent kind of service to the community kind of sits with a company of this nature that is, owned by a community vis-a-vis other directorships and other ways of considering, I guess, fair and equitable in the broader market.
They were my words, exactly. Yes. Just by way of comparison, the peer group that we used generally also community-owned assets. So it's not as if this is trying to judge it against a different ownership or arrangement. And in respect to fees elsewhere, I do know that in my own experience, I'm a director on a number of other companies, and they do pay more than this.
Thank you. So would it be your view then that sort of the community service aspect, if you like, is priced into this already then?
Yes, I do believe that is the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of my questions have been asked. I just have one left, which is I'm just trying to get a gauge of the workload, and you've spoken a little bit about it, but I was just wondering, how often does the board actually meet?
On a formal basis, the board meets at least once a month for a board meeting, which I would anticipate is in the realm of 5 hours-ish. Although for some, of course, there's travel to get here and go and return home. And on top of that, there are regular committee meetings, such as the Audit and Risk Committee. There are meetings outside of those formal arrangements, such as when we meet with the auditor or various other parties, maybe in terms of property development and so on. There are also strategy meetings and occasional such things as well, reporting to the shareholder and other things that we do. It is something that varies considerably, but on our basis, we would say it's a few days a month and about double for a chair.
Okay, and with that, has that increased since COVID, or is it the same as it has always been, or?
Well, actually, as a result of COVID, we met at least every week because at that stage there was a turn off of revenue, and we just had no history to fall back on. You know, as I said, it was a new storyline. So in that case, we operated probably 3 or 4 times more than we had on a normal basis. As we've regularised, if I could call it that, the new environment, we are still seeing though a lot more activity around culture, around health and safety, around property development in particular. That is taking more and more attention and time for the board.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Final question I have is from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve and Murray. I guess you're asking us to take a pool approach to the remuneration, similar to that which we ourselves are remunerated on, actually. So would it be fair to say then that if we take that approach, if in the future you determine as a board that you need an extra board member, that you wouldn't be coming back for an increase in the pool?
That will be very much dependent upon what the board at the time say. I do believe that the formula, it's a formulaic approach that we have to separating that pool, which we've adopted and which is pretty common ground across most boards, that there are additional payments for the chair and the chair of the 2 subcommittees. So those are rewarded accordingly. The approach has been that the pool is separated by the company, and we do so. As long as the skill set that the board requires is there, it lives within that pool. It does not need to come back for more directors, I suppose, to call it that. And the base we've deemed should be relevant to others rather than to the number of people that are on there. But I can't say categorically that we would or wouldn't, because it's not just my call.
So would it be helpful then if, as well as determining the pool, that the shareholder also determined what the base rate would be?
That would then start to it would be specific. It would give very good guidance, but might step across the current constitution, which is that the board determines how that's separated.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. That's all the questions, so you may step down, gentlemen. Now, Karen, Councillor Naylor, you have an amendment, so I think we'll deal with that first. And if you'd like to.
I'd like to move it as an alternate recommendation, actually. I don't think the other recommendation has been moved or seconded, so I'd propose to move this instead of the one in the paper, that the total remuneration for directors of P&AL remain at the current allocated amount of 121,040. So that amount is outlined at the bottom of page 104. My reason for proposing this is that it didn't sit well for me to increase 8 months and a further increase than what has been allocated. In December, when we were asked by the airport, we were actually asked to increase by 45% to 157,000. And at the time we opted for a 25% increase to 135,000 on the basis that that was needed for the 6th director. And certainly I think if at the time we had known that there would only be 5 directors continue throughout the year, I don't think we would have actually supported a 25% increase at that time. As it turns out, the allocated amount that's been identified is 121,000, which is still a 12% increase from the 108,000 that we started with in December. Given that there is this is reviewed annually, I think it's better to keep it tidy. I'm happy to wait for the annual renewal, the review next year. Well, I guess it will be early next year, for this to be further increased. If we were to approve what was in the papers for the full 135,000, that would be a further 11.5% increase, as well as the 12% increase that's already been allocated. Yes, I totally agree that we need to pay our directors. We need to allocate enough money for them to be paid, paid appropriately. But the current environment, I don't think supports a 12% and then a further 11.5% increase within one financial year. That just doesn't sit right for me in terms of the ratepayers who have faced a very significant, it's been a difficult year for ratepayers. Yes, it's a small dollar amount. I mean, the difference between 121,000 and 135,000 is fairly minimal in the overall scheme of things. But in terms of the principle of this, I think we need to be careful that we don't approve, I think approving 135 goes against the intent of the decision that was made in December. And I think this is a tidier way to retain the integrity of that decision for the meantime, given that there is clearly only 5 directors that need to be paid. I hope that's clear.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I can't support this. We've just heard the amount of work that this board has to do. I asked the question, what was the asset base that they managed on our behalf? 80 million. We're now debating 14,000. Look, I disagree with the councillor some of the methodology of where you get to with your percentages, but I suppose it really comes down to artificially keeping the directors' fees low for a long, long time. So I can't support this. It's this organisation, this entity earns revenue for the city. It plays a major role as a gateway. Thirdly, it's entering a once-in-a-lifetime or generation master plan terminal redevelopment. This isn't some local ward committee. This is a skill-based board, and we're penny pinching, absolutely penny pinching here. And vote this down, please. This is silly.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was happy to second and support this recommendation wholeheartedly and would ask you to join me in that support. I'm quite comfortable with a 12% increase for directors. I think that's only fair and reasonable in the current environment that we're in. But the main reason really for me is that a primary part of the argument for the increase to 135 was built on the change in number of directors. And if that works when the number increases, it should also work when the number of directors decreases. So I think it is a simple and fair application of the same rationale that was applied for the increase to 135 should now be applied to draw that back, given that we're now at 5 directors rather than 6. In terms of moving forward, I would be quite keen that we do look for something that actually builds a level of predictability and reduces the level of debate around this. And I think there are tools for ensuring that remuneration does track the market over time. And I'd be quite keen to see in the next round that we look to put something in place that actually takes that approach rather than the arguing back and forth approach which we're currently in. Madam Chair.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting this, and I will be looking to move the recommendation that's in the paper. Looking to have a seconder probably from the Mayor. because I think that what was being put in the paper by officers is the 135,000, and I think that's what we need to support. I think the officer and Murray put up the very good argument, and hearing what they said, it was about trying to retain good board members and keep them in this current climate, and working through the issues that we've had with COVID, working through the tough financial times that we've got going forward, and working through the strategy that we've got for the airport and trying to bring that through this tough economic times. So I will look to support that with the 5 current board members and keeping them and retaining them on those salaries that they are proposing. I mean, they're a board that should be supported, and all boards should be supported, but that's why I'm going to support them with what this is in the recommendation on page 101, but I won't be supporting the recommendation that's up on there at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting the recommendation in front of us for 2 reasons. First, when the board came to us and requested an increase, they requested an increase to 157,000 for 6 directors and 135 for 5. And we approved 135, but asked them to make it go around 6. So for me, this feels it's still in line with what the board requested in the first place. And there was reason for what they requested then. Secondly, my reason for not supporting this is because it's my pleasure to be involved in the interviewing panel for these board appointments. And what I've noted over time is the strong field of quality candidates that we get, but sometimes the problem of numbers in that field, which has meant over time that we've sometimes struggled to appoint for the right skills that the board have identified. And that's what got us into the situation of the board coming and asking for a further director to be appointed. So it's my view that by remunerating this position or this pool appropriately, we not only attract good quality candidates, which has always been the case, but we increase the size of the pool so that we can respond to the skills gaps the board identifies. And by, as the Mayor has called it, penny pinching to bring this to the 121,000, so effectively reducing the allocated budget, which sits at 135 for this year, we do our board a disservice and we put ourselves in a difficult position moving into what we know is a competitive recruitment market. And we want the best for our airport, especially in these trying times. We want the best for our community in these trying times. So I won't support this, and I will support the recommendation that Councillor Harper has signalled she will move.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I won't support this. Is the old story, you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. Now, we have got an asset worth $80 million. And if you have a look at every time you go past the airport, the growth that's out there, the building that's going out there, our asset is growing. Now, we need skilled and able people to be governing our airport. And we need to attract people for the next vacancy who will be willing to build on that asset. I have no doubt that if we are going to be so miserly that we're going to cut back the pool, the quality of people that'll be applying won't be there. I'm quite sure, councillors, if one of us got sick or something and couldn't remain on council, that if our pool was threatened, we'd jump up and down and scream. We are on a pool just the same as the board at the airport is. We had decided that that pool would be $135,000. That's what we decided. It's irrelevant how many people are on that board. They're the governance board. We give them $135,000 to govern it. That's what we agreed on. And to try and cut it back now is like, well, judge for yourself.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am happy to support this recommendation, actually. I've heard a lot of the comments that have been made around needing to pay appropriately for skilled people, and that if you don't pay appropriately, you'll get monkeys. But actually, I do think that we are paying appropriately at this point in time. We've got quite a few things that we need to balance, and this is community money that we're talking about. And there are plenty of people, skilled people, who work in our community who don't earn this kind of money. And so I think actually increasing this pool by 12%, as what's already been explained, is appropriate for this point in time. That's not to say that I wouldn't agree to increasing it after a further review in September or next year or whenever the next appropriate review system happens. But I think right now we made the decision back in December to pay the 135K for 6 directors. And that was a decision that we made. And it was, from memory, actually quite close. And so I'm happy for it to go back to the 120K. Sorry, I can't see the recommendation, but the amount that Councillor Naylor has put up, because that's only for 5 directors. And if there's a further review that says, actually, we need to do more, then we can discuss it then. But on principle, this is not the review point in time to be even having this discussion. The only reason why they ended up with 135K is because we were looking at 6 directors. The only reason why we're looking at 6 directors is because they said they didn't already have the skills and they needed to pull in an extra director with those skills. So I think at this point, I'm happy to stick with the 5 directors. I'm happy to stick with the smaller amount of remuneration, noting that it's only a smaller amount, and that if there's a review later down the line, that's the appropriate moment to actually look at increasing more if we want to. So I'm happy to support the recommendation in front of us now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting this recommendation for a couple of reasons. The first one is that we need to be sending the right message to people who are stepping forward to manage our assets, and sending a message at this stage that we don't think that someone should be paid, 22,000, I think it is, 750 for the work that they do on the board. We don't think that that's we think that that's excessive. I think that sends the wrong message. And I think we need to be really careful about the message that we do send, and not only to the current directors, but to anybody who might be thinking of being a director in the future. I don't really agree with the harking back to decisions that we made last year and the reasons why we made them. We're here now. We've got a budgeted pool of 135,000. It's in the budget. Nobody's asking for that budget to be increased. It's already there. And my view is that we should be sending an appropriate message which says, we support you, we're grateful for the work that you're doing on behalf of the city. We recognise that the remuneration we give you isn't nearly enough for the skills, talents and time that you bring. So I'm really not in favour of sending any other message at this stage, particularly given that 135,000 is what we have budgeted. So it's not even an ask for extra money at this point. And I thought Councillor Bowen made a good point when she said that actually the board requested 157,000 and we cut it back. So I've listened to the arguments to and fro. I came in with an open mind, I must say. And in fact, possibly I was, a little bit concerned about how we'd arrived at this point. But in the course of the debate, it became clear to me that it doesn't really matter how we arrived at this point. The question is, what do we do going forward? And what message are we sending to people that are working hard to manage this asset on our behalf? So I'd encourage you, councillors, to just think about the message that you're sending when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. I'd just like to add a couple of comments. I'm not going to support this. I think our airport board punches above its weight, and councillors, we're probably in a unique situation where a lot of our ratepayers are not propping up the airport boards. And many of the outside councillors are having to put grants in and spending a lot of money propping up their boards, especially through the COVID years. So we have a competent board, and I think we should pay them accordingly. They've asked for an increase, and I'm comfortable with that increase, so I'm happy to support. Councillor Naylor, do you want your right of reply?
Yes, please. Yes, so a couple of things. I agree with Councillor Johnson that we need to think about the messages that we send, and absolutely I appreciate the work that the directors are doing in terms of managing the airport. But I'm also interested in the messages we send our ratepayers. And if we are to revert back to the recommendation that is in the paper, what we're telling our ratepayers is that in a year that some of them have had to fork out more than 20% increase in their rates, we're saying it's okay to have a 12% increase, and within the same year, a further additional 11.5% increase, 2 increases in 1 year. I guess what I'm saying is that at a time when ratepayers are receiving no dividend from the airport, from the asset that they own, I think that would be quite a difficult thing to stomach. Excuse me. I mean, it is a small amount of money, I acknowledge, and some others have acknowledged that, but there's a principle involved in the decision here. We would never have approved a 25% increase if the amount of directors had remained at 5 in December last year. So it does feel a little bit like a roundabout way to get a 25% increase, when I don't think the current environment is appropriate to award a 25% increase. So I'd urge you to support this. This is not saying that no, we shouldn't further increase down the track, but that should happen as an annual increment, not two lots of increases within 1 year.
Thank you, councillor. We will now go to vote, but I'll just read the recommendation out first, and that the total remuneration for directors of Palmerston North Airport Limited remain at the current allocated amount of $121,040. So we'll now go to vote. And that is lost 13 votes, 3 votes for and 13 against. We'll now move to the main recommendation, or the original recommendation, and Councillor Harpeta, you wanted to move that, and I'm happy to second that. I am not going to go into comments for this unless anybody has wanting something that hasn't already been said. We have debated this through the first, and I have been fair and allowed the amendment to come through as a recommendation first. So I'm happy to go without comment on this. So we will now vote on this one. And that is carried 12 votes for and 3 against. We will now move on to our next item, which is item number 6, which is the quarterly performance and financial report ending the 30th of June 2022. And it's going to be presented by Cameron Mackay, our Chief Financial Officer, Andrew Boyle, Head of Community Planning, and Kathy Deaver-Todd, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. And that is on page 11. So over to you when you're ready. Thank you, Murray.
Good morning, Madam Chair and councillors. I'll take the report largely as read, but there's a few points I just want to make before questions. I think it's fair to say that a year in which we've had COVID lockdowns, supply chain issues as a result, and labour shortages throughout the country, it's been a challenging year, and I think that's a pretty fair summation. The main impact, of course, on a lot of these has been our ability to deliver our capital program. We had quite a large capital program, and we ended up delivering about 49 million of it. So it is fair to say that that has been a challenge, and one that we've been working through as new issues have arisen. The point to note is that the operating surplus has reduced in the fourth quarter, and it reduced to 3.2 million. There are some reasons behind that outlined in the report, and some of them were difficult to predict. For example, the storm event that hit us in June, we had to respond. I do want to just comment briefly on some of the highlights for the year, because I think, given the challenges we have had, it is important to note that despite those, we actually did deliver a number of things that were of benefit to the community. The first one I just want to highlight really is the 9.3 million funding we got for Three Waters to improve our water assets from DIA. We achieved and actually delivered 9.3 million and utilised that funding. That's despite the fact that 2 weeks after the period closed, we were offered an extension, which was not all that helpful, but I think it was pleasing to note that we were one of the councils that did deliver. Just want to mention that we also completed the upgrade at Memorial Park, and I think that's been an asset that the community did enjoy over summer coming out of COVID lockdowns, and I think those things have meant a lot to communities to have access to those facilities. We delivered another 28 units at Papio Place, despite the impacts on the construction industry through lockdown and supply chain issues. And we also partnered with Rangatani and delivered a Matariki event, which I think was something that's worth noting in a time where events were few and far between because of the restrictions. You know, I just wanted to highlight a few of the positives as well as the challenges that we have had during the year. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Cameron. Would either or you? Oh, my name's gone. Kathy. Sorry, I kept thinking Debbie. Give me a moment. So have you got anything, Kathy, that you want to?
No, I think just further to reflect that it has been a really difficult and complicated year, and as project managers, you set out with a plan, and in this last year we've been having to adapt and be quite agile in our methodology. On top of that, not only where we've got a supplier lined up, but when that supplier rings in and says, actually, I've got no staff, I can't work, and that's delayed by a couple of weeks. So that's impacted our subcontractors and contractors in our environment as well, and the flow-on effects from that. However, I would say as we got towards the end of the year, we were starting to see the benefits of developing our contract management discipline and getting that team up and running, the improvements that had been made in terms of setting up the design panel and starting to get things lined up for the next year. So whilst we got the horrible weather in June and we've had it again in July, we are better placed as we're going forward with those things, and we sort of had a recovery towards the end of the year, and actually our spend in June was at the same level as it was the year before. So we were really starting to see that picking up again. It's been a really challenging year, and I do thank you for your support during that year.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, so I'll go first. In your financial summary, Cameron, you've got the financial team have identified a number of improvements that we can implement to mitigate the risk of future surprises and to better forecast our likely spend, which has always been a big issue to me. So could you please tell me the key things that are going to drive our forecasting in a better space?
Yeah, so and this year we didn't undertake a formal 6-month reforecast, which we would normally do, and that was because of the challenges around staffing and illness and coming out of COVID. So that wasn't able to take place as it normally would. We will be reintroducing that. That will help give us that forward visibility. We are also working alongside the business on a regular basis and capturing anything that comes up that we need to be aware of, so that we can at least assess what the impact is going to be and report that back through better than what we perhaps have done this year. So the third thing on that is we've got a review underway. We're instigating a review to look at our financial reporting as a whole, and we do want to await some of those recommendations as well to really understand how we can best provide information to elected members as well, in terms of flagging those issues early, so we don't have any sort of last quarter surprises.
Yep. So one of the issues that I've seen in the past is like our first quarterly report. By the time that comes to council, it will be probably, because it's an election year, probably about November. So we're pretty much 5 months into the financial year, and yet there doesn't seem to be, red flags there that a significant amount of things cannot be done. So do you see that being our first sort of key trigger to say, well, hey, we're definitely going to be behind, or just bring this stuff forward?
Yes, the first quarter report should be highlighting any changes that we know today, and because it is November, there is an element of looking not just at the first quarter, but the first quarter plus October, I think would be worthwhile, because we would know that information. I know that through the project management team, there's quite a bit of work going on as well around understanding the delivery forecasts and any issues that might become known. We'd be able to highlight any of those as well.
Okay, thank you. And just another thing, on page 67, it's around the program 1879 Council's Plant and Vehicle Replacements, and it's bringing forward $1 million, and it's got offsets to be found before adjustments made, and then it's got to be advised. So is that?
Yeah, I did pick that up after the report been on the agenda. Now, in doing our reconciliation, we have actually found there's $4 million of savings or not spent CapEx from the current year in our end of year reconciliation. We'll go through and identify what ones we can apply to this.
Okay, thank you. Right, question, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Kim, Kathy, and Andrew for being available for questions. 3 areas, I think. The first is there is a couple parts in the levels of service and performance measures area, indicating that we had seen quite a decline around public kind of trust and satisfaction and ease of having your say, etc., with council. That gives reference to a 2022 resident survey. Could I just understand a little bit about when the survey was run and when those results became available to officers?
Chair, councillors. So the survey is run, we do the survey in quarterly batches throughout the year, so it's not impacted by any one-off events. We're just waiting for the full report to come through before we can circulate it to people. So we've got the interim results, but it's only, we haven't got the comparisons, the national comparisons yet. So we're just waiting for those.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. So I guess the comment around, kind of council response to those indicators coming through, are those specifically in response to these recently received results, or are those more kind of longer term approaches in terms of, more online engagement effort, etc.?
Not sure I understand. Well, no, I don't understand the question, sorry.
To try to rephrase it more briefly, has there been a council response yet to those findings?
Chief Executive, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, so the report is not too far away in terms of coming out. I suppose one of the challenges is that so you're right, there does appear to be a decline in that of reputational sort of product, primarily that's where it goes. I suppose one of the challenges is when you look at it is, I think there's some national impacts that certainly anecdotally we're getting. So we're sort of hearing that there is a general decline in every single council and every single measure across the country, which sort of indicates to us there may well be some sort of national impacts. And I suppose one of the things we'll have to do is to try and normalise the figures to sort of really understand what's the, well, potentially anyway, what's underlying. Until we get those sort of national benchmarks, it's going to be really hard for us to validate those things. So look, I think, as we have done every year, we look at those surveys and identify the issues and come up with strategies, and they feed into things like the long-term plan and other mechanisms. So I suppose the answer is yes, we will be doing it, but until we get that data, it's going to be really hard to do that objectively.
Great, thank you. That's helpful to have that assurance of a response coming. The second area of questions is around the active transport space, and especially around the Ashurst shared path, and the report indicating that we're still in a landowner negotiations type of state, calling that the direction to get on with it kind of started in December 2020, I believe. So just like to really understand where we're at in terms of progressing the shared path Riverside link to Ashurst.
As councillors have been previously advised, we're working through a process under the local government legislation. The comment in there referring to land negotiations refers to access to the land to continue with the planned approach, and councillors were circulated a memo on the update on that last night. But please don't take from that the comment is that we're still negotiating this. We're negotiating access and a process and working forward in collaboration with the owners where we can.
Thank you. And in terms of sense of time frame from here, in terms of likely appearance of a notice or requirement?
I can't make a comment on that because it depends on how the landowners respond to the notice.
Thank you. The final question that I have is around the comment around Arena 3 roof replacement coming. Can we just confirm, is that a like-for-like replacement, or is there any improvement in terms of insulation or other things coming into that roof?
I can probably talk to that.
Thanks, Bryce.
Yep, Bryce Hosking, Group Manager Property. So it is relatively a like for like, although as part of the Arena 3 work, we're also making some structural improvements to some of the area that was damaged through persistent leaking in the changing room area. So we're sort of taking the opportunity to make some more holistic structural changes, but then repairing the roof and trying to also focus on removing some of the internal gutters and things, which are a constant sort of area of maintenance. So a pretty multifaceted piece of work, but it should make quite an improvement and give it a considerably extended piece of life.
Thank you, Bryce. Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Cam and Kathy, for the report. My first question is actually around the carry through of capital expenditure for the year. And I guess in asking this question, I'm mindful of what a difficult year it's been in terms of resource constraints and pressures on the organisation. So just what are the implications of that very, very significant capital through and carry through in terms of risk management, availability of resources? What does it mean in terms of what we'll spend or our capacity to do things that we said we would do this year? Can you just share what the management team's thinking in that regard and how they're approaching it?
Yes, certainly. So we've gone through the 2022-23 program with a fine-tooth comb as a first step to look to say, is there anything further that we could carry forward into next year? And we've indicated a relatively small amount, 2 million odd, that would be carried forward. That's really to look around not so much the ability to deliver, but whether it needs to be delivered. We've set up the design panel, as we spoke earlier about. Of the 60 odd designs that need to go through that panel, 46 are already with the panel, and by the end of August, all 60 will be there. So we're well ahead in terms of managing this current year's program going forward. Probably out of the blocks faster than we've ever been in terms of that. We've also set up our contractor management division in our unit, which allows the project managers to hand over a project into that contract management phase rather than trying to manage both phases themselves, with a focus on that. We've completed all our scheduling for the year and all our forecasting. We are confident, given where we are currently with what we know, and it's a very changing environment, that what we are going to deliver, we can deliver and we need to deliver in the year to meet on council's commitments through the annual plan. When we look at the carry forwards from last year, most of those are underway now. 94% of those are either under contract or committed, and many of those projects were in flight. What happened in June is we weren't able to complete a number of those because of the weather and other delays explained in the report. I think the thing is, what I'd ask councillors not to focus so much on is the dollars of the program, but the types of projects that are within the program. So there are things in there like land purchases and one-off big projects like seismic, which makes the scale of the program bigger, but not necessarily more projects or the complexity of the projects we're managing any more difficult. So we have got now a maturing program management office. Last year we weren't as well staffed in that area as we are now, and that contract management. So we have confidence with what we've got, that we've got the right people, the right processes. Our supply chain, we've had early engagement about a month ago with our contractors. We've got good feedback from them to help to speed up that procurement phase in terms of the things that they're looking for to have confidence for the pricing. We got some really good feedback around them about that they weren't pricing for some of our jobs because we made it quite difficult for them to price. It was risky and there's a lot of other work out there. And we're seeing some work that we're doing with the contractors and with subcontractors to grow their capability locally, because many of the contracts that we put out in the civil works sector are heavily reliant on subcontractors. So I think across the unit, we've had a really concerted effort to multifaceted across all the parts of the chain. But the real big change for us with this year's program is just how many things we've got with the design panel at the moment and are moving through the design phase.
Thank you. So I think what you're telling me, Kathy, is that you'll get through this carry over from the last financial year, and you will very largely complete this year's capital program.
That's certainly our plan, and I think what has happened historically is we've concentrated on last year's carry forward and then thought, okay, right now we need to get into this year's work. What we've done, we've got both swim lanes going at the same time.
And
so we're working quite hard with different contractors and different people on different projects to get those carry forwards pushed through, but not to delay this year's work.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question relates to the ERP system, and I'm conscious through this report actually that there are different references to contract management systems, asset management systems, and I'm conscious that with COVID and the difficulties we've had in the last 12 to 18 months, that ERP system has been parked, that we've seen changes in staff. So my question to you is, what are you thinking around managing that risk, making sure that we've got the scope of that project right? And it's a very fundamental project for the council. So what are we doing to mitigate that risk, make sure that we're picking up all of the requirements of that ERP system, that we haven't missed anything, that the passage of time hasn't changed our aspirations or requirements?
Thank you. I can answer that question. So in terms of that project has gone through, because of COVID, there's been a delay, and what we've done, taken the opportunity to do in that time is really have a deep dive look at the program to go, is this still the right thing to be doing? We've got some independent advice around how we were doing it, which has given us some really good recommendations, and I'm actually really quite confident sitting here today where with that particular project is going. We've acknowledged that it is more than just putting in a new piece of software. It is much larger than that. There's a big change management component to it. A lot of our business processes and processes that our staff do today will change to the new systems methodology, and so we are putting a lot more effort in and around that space to ensure that we give our staff the best chance of succeeding when that project goes live. We've got project management staff in that project leading that now as we speak. They have a plan in place. They are working with vendor, with our staff to deliver on that project. So yes, that is a big project with risks, and we also looked at the risk of not doing the project at all. We can't not do the project. The system we currently have has a number of issues, as well as coming towards the end of its own product life. So we looked at all of that holistically as part of doing the independent review before we reset and set off again.
So, Cameron, you're confident that you've got the organisational buy-in, the resourcing, and everything that you need to deliver that project?
Yes, I think we do. We are working with the staff across the organisation as well to understand the impacts that they will have, and we're trying to be smart in how we do impact upon them, because some areas you can't easily just simply backfill people. You know, they might only be involved for 2 or 3 weeks, whereas others will be involved for longer periods of time. So we've looked at who those key people are as well, and made sure that we've wrapped around support to ensure that they can partake in this project. The Chief Executive has made it quite clear that this has to be a #1 priority for the organisation, and that certainly was the advice given to us from others who had been through this process, that it is significant in terms of a change project.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question relates to health and safety, and the sense I get from reading the report is that we're in a little bit of a reset, that we're reassessing the charter, that there are only 4 out of 12 critical recommendations that have been actioned. And I just wanted some flavour around where that's at, the level of confidence that we aren't dropping the ball in the organisation around health and safety, and that we're really on top of it.
I might just start by asking Wayne Wilson, our Acting Chief People Officer, just to provide a bit of a comment, because we have a new employee and some things underway, and then might do a follow-up comment.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chris. Yes, Alan, our previous Safety and Health Manager, retired at the end of June, and we've just brought on Selwyn, who I'll introduce at the next Finance and Audit Committee meeting, Selwyn Ponga Davis. In relation to a couple of comments you made there around the 4 out of 12, that's around the critical risks we have. We've identified 12 critical risks, and we've done all the work on it in terms of bow ties and developing our plans for those. But obviously you need to review those on a regular basis, and so we've reviewed 4 of the ones where there's been more incidents to redo the bow ties and go out to the business and check them and all the rest of it. We'll do the next 8 over this coming period this year. But also we're going to review and just make sure that the 12 are, not that we haven't got the right 12, but that there isn't anything else that we need to include onto that. At the same time, we've had a couple of reviews that we've done, and we've Selwyn's bringing a plan together that we will put forward for the work program to improve the health and safety in the organisation, and the council have provided some money for us to get support to do that. So we're on track for that as well. I think from a health and safety perspective, I think we're improving all the time, which is what everyone's aiming for, and I think we're moving in the right direction, and things are improving. I think there's been some significant change in the way that people are looking at health and safety incidents and how we interact with our staff and members of the public. And there have been some of the issues that we've been dealing with. Anything else, Chris, you want to add?
Thanks, Wayne. I think that sort of covers it pretty well. And I suppose, yeah, look, we're not where we want to be. And as Wayne mentioned, you'll recall that there was a reasonably significant budget approved through the annual plan process, which we believe is going to give us the resources to make a big move this year. Sarah Sinclair, our Chief Infrastructure Officer, has taken an executive lead in terms of pushing the program along, and obviously within the infrastructure unit, they've got a significant increase. So I think between that, getting a new person on board, the reset, the reviews that we've done, we're anticipating making some good progress this year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Now, just looking at page 50, at the reconciliation of the capital program, and looking at capital renewals, budgeted 32.4 million and actual 26.6 million. A big part of our increase in rates was to support that step up in the renewals last year and for the coming years. Given that we delivered 5.8 million less than budgeted, would that, and because renewals is usually, predominantly rates funded, would we not expect to see a bigger surplus as a result of that?
In terms of the capital renewals, the way in which they're funded is over a 3-year rolling average. So you certainly wouldn't see a corresponding $5.8 million surplus because of that. It would depend on how that's impacting on the rolling average. When we do refer to the surplus, we are referring to the operating surplus, or the operating components of the profit and loss, but also we need to factor in terms of renewals, if there's any external funding, that sort of thing, 'cause that comes out of what's rate funded as well.
Yeah, thank you. I do understand that, and I know underneath that line it says how it's funded, and I know some of those numbers are incorrect, but I know that the corrections were emailed through. But it was meant to be funded 26.3 million by rates, but was only funded 21.79 by rates, which is about 4.5 million difference. So I'm trying to understand where that 4.5 million that was funded by rates for our renewals that we didn't spend, would we not expect that to show up in our surplus amount?
That 26 odd million. So that's looking at it on an annual basis. We would have to then extrapolate that as to what the actual 3-year rolling average for the rates is. I don't have that detail in front of me, but there would be I'd say a smaller impact in terms of on the surplus.
So
and certainly, if we look at the surplus for the surplus for the year, the surplus for the year before tax was 20 million. There are some other non-operating factors in there, but it will be incorporated within that total of $20 million surplus.
Okay, thank you. And so just moving on to the surplus, obviously I have acknowledged that it's smaller than what you'd originally anticipated, and particularly when we did the annual budget deliberations, I think it was flagged that it would, we were expecting it to be higher than that, particularly when we allocated some operating programs to be paid for by the surplus. Can you just refresh my memory as to how much operational we've allocated that surplus to in the 22-23 year?
I think from memory, we're talking about 1.7 million.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So still just, thank you. Just moving to page 73. There is a comment there somewhere, can't find it now. Anyway, there is a comment there that somewhere that officers will continue to work to identify early carry forwards into the 23-24 year, and the chair has already commented on that also. Now, in terms of when we would expect, so your answer to the chair was that would some of that be identified as soon as the first quarterly report?
It would depend on the program. So what we're signalling there is something that might be carried through to the 23-24 year would be something that's happened, for example, in the growth sector, where we know that a developer is not moving at the pace that we thought we would, and so therefore it goes into the next year, or we haven't secured external funding from another party. Those are the types of things we were thinking about. It's probably unlikely that they would start to emerge until after the 6-month review.
And what mechanism do elected members have to input into any prioritisation or decision making around which capital programs will proceed or won't proceed if, in fact, we have another year that we don't deliver on the full 101 million capital program?
The councillors at the beginning of the year set the annual budget, and that's your prioritisation of what you want us to deliver during the year, and that's always our intention as staff to go out and deliver upon that. We bring to your attention through Finance and Audit or through the Infrastructure Committee any factors that we become aware of that may impact on the delivery of those programs. That's probably likely to be at a program by program level, but our intention is always to deliver what you've given us in the annual plan.
And so what we've given you in the annual plan is all programs are equal effectively. We haven't said some are more important than others. So if only some are to progress, like perhaps as an example, this year we've had less than half progress, or even less than that in terms of the capital program, 21 out of 70 odd million. So when there's when there's only a portion of capital new, for example, to progress, do elected members have an ability to have any sort of input into determining which ones progress and which ones don't in our current structure?
You would if there was an event or an effect that meant that the chief executive was coming back to you and saying, because of these extraordinary events or things that are happening in the wider market, that we need to go through a prioritisation type process. But ordinarily, we would be bringing them as individual projects.
Okay.
The chief executive.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I'd just jump in. I know this is a conversation we have had in the past, and first of all, say I sort of completely understand where you're coming from, and I think one of the things that Kathy has pointed out and Sarah's talked about before is some of the initiatives that we've put in place for deliverability and give more confidence around that. So one of the advantages in terms of keeping the program quite large is that we can get a lot of work underway. We can get the plans done. We can start, the engagement with contractors and get them in the pipeline, I suppose. As Kathy also pointed out earlier, sometimes there are things that come often outside our control around availability of their supply chain issues or staff issues, which that then means when those happen, they're not things that we can say, right, let's put that on the back burner because we've already sort of started them, we've done our dough in a ways. However, I think it is a fair question that if we did get to the point, say halfway through the year or getting towards that last part of the year where there are projects that we literally haven't started and what have you, and we do have some choices to make to say, let's just not start those. I think that is when we can then bring things back and give elected members a legitimate opportunity to provide some guidance around priorities. And I think, Cam's also mentioned that one of the things that he and I have got on underway is just a review of a lot of our financial reporting and our sort of reporting generally through to council. And I think this is one of the factors that we need to put in place. So I can't say that, all of a sudden you're going to have a massive choice of a huge list, but where there are ones that haven't been started, we do have a legitimate ability to stop them. Then I think that is reasonable that we could bring them back and ask for some guidance around priorities.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Just final question. I guess looking at the capital program, I feel in reading some of the other papers that are in our agenda today, I am feeling that I'm getting some inconsistent messages about whether or not we are intending to deliver the full capital program. I guess comments such as this about officers identifying carry forwards early is one, but also in future reports, the 30% haircut or hedging in terms of how we fund our capital program is an assumption that we factor into our funding, yet doesn't seem to translate to our planning in terms of how we deliver on our capital program. And it does concern me a little bit that there are sort of two pictures here that are being painted.
So what's your question, councillor?
My question is, if we were to approve the increase in capital program that's been proposed in the recommendations here of 7.3, and our 96 million program becomes a $101 million program, obviously with the 2.3 coming off it, do we have the funding to deliver on that in terms of what we have budgeted and approved in terms of borrowing and rating for the current financial year?
Through Madam Chair, yes, we do. We do factor in funding for the full amount. The haircut that you refer to in a future report is a mechanism that is used to ensure that we don't overhedge in terms of our treasury risk management, and it is that particular issue is if you get into an overhedge position, it becomes more costly. So we're managing that slightly differently. But of course, if we found ourselves, spending in a linear manner through the year, then of course we would be readjusting that haircut as we go. But also we are factoring in wider views in terms of our treasury management. We're also looking ahead at 3 water reform and ensuring that we don't have so much hedging in place that when that debt starts rolling off, that we're in a position where we're stuck with fixed rate borrowing on loans that we no longer require. So it's a complex area.
Thank you. Just one further follow-up question. Sorry, I won't delay it too much. But in June, we approved the interest for the borrowing, but we only approved a third of what we needed to deliver on the 96 million, whereas traditionally we would approve 50% of the interest, being, assuming a sort of straight curve. Given that, if we fund 101, have we budgeted for the interest, particularly given that interest rates are rising?
There's two parts to that question. In terms of budgeting on the assumed interest that we knew of at the time, yes, we have, because we won't be uplifting borrowing on day one. So it is spread through the year, and typically construction months are in the, for a lot of projects, there is a construction season. So we factored that in. In terms of if interest rates rise through the year, that's a different question, and one that we would have to report back to you as and when that occurs. That is part of the reason why we do have some interest rate protection through swaps to try and mitigate some of that risk. But it is fair to say that interest rates have been rising faster than what most have anticipated. And if we find ourselves in a challenge with that, we would be bringing that back to you as to what that impact is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. Thank you to the team. On page 66, there is a table in there. I was interested in the reduction in capital revenue from Waka Kotahi of 1.9 million. With that, what projects does that actually affect? So what projects aren't we doing because of the 1.9 million that we didn't get?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that reduction in capital revenue was as a direct response to us not knowing the funding envelope that Waka Kotahi were providing us back in November, and it was reported at that time. And I think there was an acknowledgement that Streets for People, for example, was one of those projects that we'd requested funding for but did not receive.
Okay, so it's Streets for People.
Amongst other things, yes, I don't know the full list off the top of my head, but it was reported through back at the time that the Waka Kotahi funding.
Okay, great. Second question's on page 71. It might be for the acting chief executive. It's about staffing. So currently it's sitting at 687. Just wanted to know what your maximum number, when do you know when is the right number of people that you need to have in the organisation? What is the number?
Great question. Look, there's just, so I don't have a clear answer for it. I don't know if there is a particularly right answer at any particular point in time, but it's a reasonable question to ask. So one of the things that we have initiated as an organisation is to put more into strategic workforce planning. So it's something that we have done reasonably well in some parts of the business and not so well in others. So for instance, and from my perspective, we really need to start with the long-term plan and the service levels that are agreed to there, and effectively have a more objective way of sort of working from there to say, to deliver those service levels, what staff do we need? And also have that conversation during the long-term plan process so that we can make choices and be clear about that. So look, it's also a function of, insource and outsource. We have looked at some benchmarking data in the past to try and identify how do we look compared to other councils. That's incredibly difficult because often you're not looking at sort of apples with apples, and you're trying to sort of do reconciliations on terms of what people provide. The stuff that we have done doesn't indicate that we're certainly too high. And in fact, on some measures, we'd say we're quite low compared to others, but it is really hard to say. What I can tell you is that what we do within the business is every time we have a vacancy, is that we do examine that vacancy to make decisions about whether just replacing it is the right thing to do. So we don't just automatically, replace people. Given the environment where we have low levels, high levels of vacancies anyway, and we're struggling to get through the work. We're certainly probably 10 more to replace people just to try and keep up with the workload. So I don't know what the right number is, but I think what we are doing is to try and have the right mechanism in place to have sort of discipline about making sure we're making objective choices around staff levels.
So the trend on this graph is to go up. So in a year's time, will there be another 50 on top of that? I know it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question, probably for Wayne, is what is the hardest area to recruit into?
That changes, but at the moment I would say engineering, so that would be in the infrastructure area. But I think there are a number of professional areas where it's very, very difficult across the board, as I sort of have discussed before, with low unemployment, low numbers of. I know that the central government are changing the levers at the moment, and that may make it easier. But really, it is a tight labour market at the moment. But if you're just looking for one, it's infrastructure at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got two areas of questions, and one of them is on page 71. So since we're on that page, I was unclear reading that page exactly how many vacancies we've got at the moment. So could someone clarify that?
Yeah. Sorry, it's Wayne Wilson again for acting Chief People Officer. In the third box there, it says 128. So that also includes people who who have resigned but are still working here. So it's just the way we've been reporting that number, which I think isn't the best way, and we'll need to change that. So I think I'm just looking to see where the number is there. There's 22 people. So if you take those off 22, it's 106 at that point in time.
Okay, but it also says in that bullet point that 33 of the 58 new roles have been filled. So.
Oh, sorry. So we're trying to explain, well, perhaps, so apologies if we didn't do a good job of this. We're trying to explain the difference between the FTE count across the council, which is the number of, basically is the number of hours that are worked, including overtime and all the rest of it, versus the budgeted number of positions, which is in the red, which is determined at the beginning of the financial year. And during the last financial year, we created 58 new positions, of which 33 of those were filled, but obviously some of them haven't been filled yet. But there's the normal vacancies in the number of people that we had at the beginning of the financial year as well. So what I was trying to do there was just give you a reconciliation between why the numbers are actually different.
Please, if it's me, somebody tell me, but I just don't understand simply how many vacancies there are from that page.
106 would be the number that I would work from.
Okay, so that number isn't on that page anywhere.
No, sorry. That's why I think, to clarify, I think I need to change the way this is reported, and we'll do that in the new number, after the election.
Okay,
so
thank you, Wayne. And I think the acting CE would like to comment.
Yeah, thanks for your question. You wouldn't believe how long we took to try and get this page to where it is now, to try and make it so people could work their way through it. Fair to say, from Kim and my perspective, we didn't quite get there. Look, this is an area we need to have another crank at to try and provide a very clear reconciliation between FTEs and positions. You know, they are both valid measures, but they are quite different, and you need to sort of work that through. The point about the 128 vacancies versus 122, they're both sort of, again, both valid ways to look at it, because if someone has resigned, then you can say, well, look, that's something, you know, that should go into the system to start working on. We've just had a conversation about that and said, well, look, I'm not sure that gives a very good view, so let's actually change that to more of a net position. So we, you know, so it would all be better to forget the 106 number today, and we will bring it back with a clearer view that we can, that it's easy to follow, because at the moment it is, yes, after going through it 3 times, I still sort of got it.
Okay, well, thank you for that anyway. I don't feel
So
quite
you're not
stupid.
Yeah, it's not you.
I suppose my follow-up to that is that that's a concerning level of vacancies. And what are we doing to try and address that? Because I'm aware that we've been carrying a high level of vacancies for some time.
Well, thanks for that question. So yes, we have, and look, I'll be quite honest, I don't think it's going to change fast. That it is something that we have been working on quite a lot. So there's a few things we're doing, but probably the most important one is the remuneration review that you would have heard us talk about a number of times. That's now coming. It's to the point where we have a clear position, and that we're I think it's okay to say, but we're in negotiations with the unions around implementing that new review. Look, I don't think that's necessarily a silver bullet either. I think there's a whole lot of things that we need to do. You know, we have an employee experience sort of group within HR now. They're starting to get underway with a number of initiatives that they're doing in terms of looking at effectively, you know, how we're, you know, how the environment for our staff, and that's another big factor. So look, there's a number of, it's something that we're focusing on because it's killing us right across the business and making it very difficult for us to, you know, maintain high levels of wellness. The other thing that I'd just say that we're doing at the same time is trying to be very deliberate about what we take on. It's quite often easy to just say, oh, yes, we can do that, and expect people to take on yet another job. So we're trying to be very deliberate about that. We're using the term ruthless prioritisation, and that is my sort of mantra to say, you know, we need to do that. We need to be really clear about what we can do with the resources we have, and then do a really good job of working with the stakeholders who are expecting that job to be done about getting ahead of managing those expectations.
Thank you. So my second area of questioning is on page 85. It should be a fairly simple one. So it's a programme that was carried forward, well, it was to be carried forward, and now it's not, which is the programme 2006 City Centre Fixed Play Development. So can I just ask what's happening about that?
Kathy, I think that might be you.
The city centre fixed play, that what you're seeing there is a capital program. Sitting with there is some work that needs to be done in terms of what our overall strategy and approach is there. And I don't know whether David wants to comment on that, but that piece of work wasn't completed due to a lack of resourcing. So we've pushed this capital out.
But it's not being requested to be carried forward. So is it just not going to happen?
That's because in the next year there is already an amount.
Okay, right. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My area of questioning is around the growth programs that are developer dependent, specifically on page 21, program 1001 Urban Growth Whakarongo. I noticed that in April the variance was 1.27 million, and then in May it was 1.7 million, and then here it's 3.8 million. And I was just wondering, with those kind of programs, do we end up sort of separating them month by month? And then if the month, if the development hasn't happened in the month, then that ends up being, I guess, put forward into this behind. But I'm just trying to work out how those kind of programs end up working. I'll just do my batch of questions and then you can answer it. So I'm wondering how we end up sort of in that space, and what we do as council to kind of keep an eye on our assumptions around all of those developer reliant programs that may or may not end up happening, and then how that information comes back to elected members or to the public to sort of look at.
Thank you for the question. It is a really tricky area. We start off first working through strategy and planning with our growth forecast for the city. And from there, we develop programs based on the anticipated timing, and we put those into the asset management plans, which feed into the long-term plan. They also feed into your development contributions policy. So we make some assumptions about when those are going to occur and the amount of money that developers will pay for that. That is all forecasting. And obviously the development of any development is dependent on a private landowner. And sometimes with some of these developments, things are affected by the economy and the developer may decide not to proceed. And other times, and what has happened in Whakarongo, there's some delays around the complications about developing that land, and in particular the stormwater issues there. So we are continually adjusting in the infrastructure unit when we think that timing is, based on what planning and strategy are telling us in terms of plan changes and applications coming in through our customer unit as well. So it's a moving field, and when we're looking at it, we're really saying what is our best guess of when that's going to happen. And we can have something lined up and then something will happen on the consenting front, or the developer will just decide he's not going to progress and our forecast is out again. So really, to go to the heart of your question in terms of coming back to elected members, those sorts of that sort of information comes back for you, probably not directly, but through things like planning and strategy committee, where you're seeing what's happening in that market and those planning type things. We could report on them. It would be a matter of how and when and which committee we might bring that to, because it is a conglomeration of information that causes those delays.
Okay, so I was just wondering if do officers have, I guess, a rounded picture of all of the different development and all of the different scenarios that are happening that you have access to?
Yes, we do. From the structure plan work, the plan change work, but also the consents that are coming in. So we can make estimations based on information like structure plans, which are great. It's a really good tool for us because we can sort of see who owns the land and what might be developed there. And we feed that into the appendices of the asset management plan. So contained within there, you would see the timing of each of those things. But as I've said, as soon as we've written it, it starts to move, and it is quite difficult.
And how much of the overall sort of annual budget ends up being tied up with these kind of growth programs that are developer dependent? I'm just wondering, like this one specific program is Whakarongo stormwater, but if we looked at the whole thing, are you able to look at officers? Are officers able to look at something and essentially see that X percentage of work just won't end up happening, and with the adjustments there?
Councillor, Kathy has answered that question.
Right. Okay. All right. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay. And this is the last question, councillors, and then we'll break for more.
So there's two questions and they're both on the same page. Both of mine are really, but page 55. I see that we haven't used, well, just over 10% of our footpath budget. Now, that carryover, will that be added to this year's, and we'll see extra footpath renewals in our city this year?
Yes, the Footpath Renewal program is underway at present. What caused a delay on that was just that funding. Funding has been secured for 3 years, and the program, as reported when the maintenance contract came forward, we were talking about the prioritisation of that work. That program is underway.
So it'll be added on. Okay. The other one, a simple one, in 1837, the swimming pools. Has the architectural design been done yet, or are we still waiting on that?
It has been commissioned and it's in flight at the moment. We really struggled this year to get architectural services. So that was just a delay with that. We're working with the company that did the last major upgrade to the Lido. So they've already got the drawings and things and have been working with us, but we just couldn't get into their pipeline any sooner.
The changing rooms should be upgraded this year, financial year.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam.
So thank you both. You may step down and we'll now break for morning tea and we will be back at 11:10.